At the family dinner, I said I'm finished with all of them. They shouted, "For what?" I said, "I know. My name is Amina Caldwell. I'm 27 years old, and I work as a nurse in Atlanta. My life looks normal on the outside, but behind the scenes, my family has been breaking me piece by piece. I need you to hear me out, because once I tell you what happened, you'll understand why I walked away. Stay with me through this story, and if it makes you feel something, I'd appreciate it if you showed some love by sticking around and sharing it with others who need to hear it." That night at the table, my hands were shaking under the cloth, but my face stayed calm. Everyone was laughing, pretending like we were the perfect happy family. My mom, Patrice, sat at the head of the table, wearing that fake polished smile she always put on when people were watching. My dad, Leonard, poured himself another drink, cracking jokes like he wasn't the harshest man I knew when the doors were closed. My sister, Kendra, rolled her eyes at me whenever she thought no one was looking, and my younger brother, Deshaun, couldn't stop bragging about something useless he did last week. I sat there, silent, letting them all believe I was just the quiet, reliable one who would take their jabs and carry their weight forever. But the truth had been eating at me. For weeks, I had been putting pieces together. The whispers behind my back. The times they told me I was too sensitive. The missing money that nobody could explain. It all added up, and I knew. The tension in my chest grew tighter with every fake laugh they let out. My fork scraped across the plate, and everyone looked up when I finally spoke. My voice was steady, but my heart was pounding. "I'm finished with all of you." The room froze. For a second, nobody moved, and then it was chaos. My dad slammed his hand on the table. My mom's face twisted, as if I'd embarrassed her in front of company. Kendra smirked, thinking it was another one of my dramatic outbursts. And Deshaun just looked confused, like he didn't even understand what I was talking about. They shouted at once. "For what?" The words echoed around the table, bouncing off the walls and back into my ears. I swallowed hard, but I didn't flinch. I leaned back in my chair and met each of their eyes one by one. I said, "I know." The silence that followed was louder than their yelling. No one laughed now. No one rolled their eyes. They just stared at me, waiting for me to explain. But I didn't give them the satisfaction, not yet. All they needed to know was that their secret wasn't safe anymore, and I wasn't the same girl they could use and dismiss. That was the moment I decided I wasn't theirs to break anymore. From the outside looking in, people thought my family was perfect. Neighbors admired us, church members praised us, and my parents carried themselves like we were the model family in Atlanta. But if you stepped inside our house and stayed long enough, you'd see the cracks running through every wall. My mother, Patrice, was the queen of appearances. She could walk into any room and make people believe she had it all together. Her nails were always done, her clothes always pressed, her voice smooth and calculated. To outsiders, she was elegant. To me, she was ice. She never raised her voice in public, but behind closed doors she cut me down with words that left marks you couldn't see. She loved control more than she loved truth, and I was her easiest target. Then there was my father, Leonard. People adored him. He was charming, quick with a joke, and could turn on the warmth like flipping a switch. But the switch had another side. At home, his words carried weight that crushed me. He didn't have to shout. Just one look from him was enough to silence me. He demanded obedience, loyalty, and silence about anything that might make him look less than perfect. To the world, he was a provider and a gentleman. To me, he was a storm waiting behind the door every night. My sister, Kendra, the golden child, could do no wrong. At 30, she still leaned on my parents like she was a teenager, but they treated her like royalty. If she failed, it was excused. If she succeeded, it was celebrated like she had moved mountains. And me? If I achieved something, it was brushed off. If I made a mistake, it was proof I was ungrateful, irresponsible, or dramatic. Kendra loved it. She carried that crown proudly, always ready to remind me where I stood in comparison. And then came Deshaun, my younger brother. At 24, he had no sense of responsibility. Reckless, spoiled, and entitled, he lived off my parents' blind protection. He could wreck a car, drop out of school, and still be handed another chance. Meanwhile, if I needed help, I was met with sighs and lectures about independence. Deshaun bragged about being untouchable, and in that house he was. My parents defended him at every turn, while I was left to fend for myself. I was the middle child, the reliable one, the nurse who worked double shifts to pay her own bills, the daughter who remembered birthdays, who kept family secrets, who patched the holes they left behind. And still, no matter what I did, I was overlooked, criticized, or used as the scapegoat. On the outside, we were polished smiles at dinners, matching outfits at church, the family that others envied. Behind those smiles, though, favoritism and betrayal rotted us from the inside out. It was a house full of secrets, and I carried the heaviest weight, knowing that one day their lies would collapse, and I'd be standing in the middle of the wreckage. It started small, almost too small to notice at first. A few whispers that stopped the moment I walked into a room. The way my mother's voice dropped when she realized I was near, or how Kendra would clear her throat and change the subject if I entered. I brushed it off at first. Family's gossip, I told myself. Maybe I was being paranoid. But then the money began to disappear. I had always been careful with my savings. Every paycheck, I put a little aside. It wasn't much, but it was mine, my safety net. One day I logged into my account and noticed withdrawals I hadn't made. At first, I thought it was a bank error. I called, only to be told the transactions had gone through with my own information. My stomach dropped. My account was bleeding money I hadn't touched. I asked my parents about it, casually at first, to see if they'd react. My dad brushed me off with a laugh, telling me I must have forgotten what I spent it on. My mom tilted her head with that fake pity look and said, "Maybe you're stressed from work, Amina." Kendra, of course, mocked me. "Maybe you're just bad with money, sis." But I wasn't bad with money. I was meticulous. And the more they denied, the more I knew something was wrong. From that point, I paid closer attention. I noticed how my mom and Kendra avoided eye contact whenever I mentioned bills or credit. If my dad was in the room, he'd redirect the conversation with a story or a sharp look that shut me up. Deshaun just shrugged whenever I asked if he'd heard anything, but his silence spoke louder than words. Then came the night that changed everything. I had come home late from a shift, exhausted, and I just wanted to collapse in bed. As I passed the hallway, I heard voices coming from the kitchen. It was my mother and Kendra. I froze when I caught my own name. "I just hope Amina never finds out," my mother whispered, her tone sharp. Kendra laughed quietly. "She won't. She's too trusting. Besides, even if she does, what can she really do?" My chest tightened. I pressed my back against the wall, heart racing, straining to hear more. But footsteps started toward me, and I slipped into my room before they caught me. I shut the door and leaned against it, my hands trembling. In that moment, I knew. Whatever they were hiding, whatever they were doing, it was tied to me. The missing money, the whispers, the way they dodged my questions, it all connected. I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the floor, feeling the betrayal creep through me like poison. My own family, the people who were supposed to protect me, were plotting in shadows I hadn't even seen. And the worst part, they thought I was too blind to ever notice. I couldn't let the whispers and missing money slide anymore. The night I overheard my mother and Kendra talking, something inside me snapped. I needed answers, and I wasn't going to get them by asking directly. They would only gaslight me again, make me feel like I was losing my mind. So I started digging. On my days off, I pulled every bank statement, every credit report, every scrap of paperwork I could get my hands on. At first, I thought maybe I'd just missed something, some automatic payment or forgotten subscription. But the deeper I looked, the clearer it became. This wasn't a mistake. Someone had been using my name, my social security number, to open accounts and move money. My heart sank when I saw my father's name pop up on one of the linked accounts. It was subtle, almost buried, but it was there. A debt tied to a company I'd never heard of, signed off with my information as guarantor. I scrolled through pages and pages of transactions, each one pulling me deeper into a nightmare. Thousands of dollars tied to me. Late payments, loans I never took, credit cards I never owned. I sat there at my small kitchen table with my laptop open, staring at numbers that didn't feel real. My credit score had plummeted. I was drowning in debt I hadn't created, debts I didn't even know existed until that moment. I felt sick to my stomach, realizing that every dream I had, buying a house, building a stable future, had been sabotaged before I even had a chance. It was my own family. My father, who always preached about loyalty. My mother, who cared more about appearances than truth. My sister, who mocked me when I asked questions. They had stolen my identity and tied me to their mess. They didn't just betray me, they used me as their shield. I remember sitting in silence for hours, my hands shaking too hard to even type. My phone buzzed with a text from Kendra asking if I could spot her a little money until Friday, like I was still the dependable one they could drain dry. I didn't respond. I couldn't. My chest was too heavy with rage and grief. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, replaying every time they'd told me I was paranoid, dramatic, or irresponsible. Every dismissal, every laugh at my expense, every cold look from my mother, it all clicked into place. They hadn't just ignored me. They had destroyed my future while smiling in my face. Betrayal doesn't even feel like the right word for it. It was deeper than that. It was sabotage, premeditated and cruel, carried out by the very people who shared my blood. And as much as it broke me, one thing became crystal clear. If they thought I'd stay quiet and carry this burden for them, they were about to learn just how wrong they were. I couldn't hold it in anymore. After nights of staring at those records, after realizing the damage they had done, I knew I had to confront them. I thought maybe, just maybe, if I went to my mother alone, she'd admit what happened. She'd at least explain. So I drove to their house one evening, my stomach twisted in knots, and asked her if we could talk privately. She led me into the living room, sat down with her hands folded neatly in her lap, and gave me that polished smile that never reached her eyes. I laid everything out, the bank statements, the accounts in my name, the debt that didn't belong to me. My voice shook as I told her I knew. Her smile didn't falter, not even for a second. She tilted her head and sighed like I was a child throwing a tantrum. Amina, you're imagining things. You've always been sensitive. You probably signed something without realizing it. You work too much, sweetheart. Maybe you're just confused. Her calmness cut deeper than if she had screamed. She wasn't shocked. She wasn't denying out of ignorance. She was gaslighting me, trying to twist reality until I doubted my own mind. Before I could push back, Kendra walked in. She looked at the papers spread across the coffee table and burst into laughter. Oh my God, you're serious. You really think Mom and Dad are out here stealing from you? You're so dramatic, Amina. Always trying to make yourself the victim. Maybe if you weren't jealous of me all the time, you wouldn't be inventing stories. Her words stung because they were exactly what she wanted them to be, sharp enough to cut, cruel enough to leave scars. I clenched my fists, fighting the urge to scream. I turned back to my mother, hoping for at least 1 ounce of decency, but she just watched in silence, letting Kendra tear me apart. Then my father entered. His presence was heavy, filling the room with tension. He looked at the papers, then at me, his jaw tight. Family takes care of family, he said in that low voice that always made me shrink as a child. Don't you dare turn on us. Don't forget who kept a roof over your head, who fed you, who made you who you are. You don't get to betray us now. It wasn't an explanation. It wasn't remorse. It was a threat, a reminder of the power he believed he still had over me. I sat there, staring at the three of them, my mother with her cold dismissal, my sister with her mocking smirk, my father with his intimidation. In that moment, the truth settled like a stone in my chest. They had no guilt, no shame. To them, I wasn't a daughter or a sister. I was disposable. And that realization hurt worse than the debt, worse than the betrayal. Because it meant I had never really been part of their family at all. After that night, I felt like the ground had been ripped out from under me. My credit was destroyed, my name was tangled in debts I never made, and my family had made it painfully clear that they saw nothing wrong with what they had done. Everywhere I turned, I felt the weight of what they had taken from me. The rejection letters for apartments I applied for, the calls from creditors demanding payment, the suspicious looks when I tried to explain it wasn't me. It all piled on until it felt like I was drowning. There were nights I lay awake staring at the ceiling, wondering how I had ended up here. I had worked so hard to build my life, to stand on my own, and with a few signatures and lies, they had torn it apart. I thought about quitting, about just giving in to the mess they created. But then I would remember the smug way Kendra laughed at me, the cold way my mother dismissed me, the steel in my father's voice when he said, "Don't you dare turn on us." That memory lit a fire in me. I realized if I stayed passive, they would win. They had stolen my future, and I couldn't let them keep their hands wrapped around my throat. So I shifted. I stopped expecting apologies, stopped hoping for change, and started preparing. The first thing I did was keep every single piece of paper. Bank records, letters from creditors, copies of my credit report. I organized them in a folder that grew thicker each week. I started recording conversations when I could, careful to capture every word of their dismissals and contradictions. Even casual remarks became evidence. I began to distance myself emotionally, too. Where once I'd show up at every family gathering out of obligation, now I pulled back. I smiled less, spoke less, and gave them nothing they could twist against me. On the outside, I looked quieter, maybe even broken. On the inside, I was sharpening my resolve. There was a shift in me that even I didn't expect. The despair was still there, heavy and suffocating, but it was no longer the only thing I carried. Alongside it grew determination. Revenge wasn't just a fantasy anymore. It became a plan. Every document I saved, every word I recorded, every fake smile I wore around them was part of a strategy. Sometimes I wondered if they noticed. If my mother saw the new distance in my eyes, if my father sensed the change in my silence, if Kendra caught the way I no longer flinched at her insults. Maybe they thought they had finally broken me for good. But they were wrong. I wasn't broken. I was patient. And I was building something far more powerful than their lies, proof. Proof that one day, I would put in front of them and watch as their perfect little world came crashing down. I told my mother one afternoon that I wanted us all to have a proper Sunday dinner, just like we used to when I was younger. Her face lit up, convinced it meant I was ready to be part of the family again. She didn't know the real reason I wanted that dinner. None of them did. I kept my voice soft, careful, even smiling as I asked her to invite everyone, my father, Kendra, Deshawn, and even our aunts, uncles, and cousins. I wanted an audience. The day came, and the house was buzzing. Patrice was in her element, directing people around the kitchen, making sure the table looked perfect. Leonard poured drinks and told stories like he was the center of attention. Kendra walked in wearing something expensive, smirking at me as though she'd already won whatever silent war we were fighting. Deshawn showed up late, stumbling in with his usual careless grin. The extended family gathered around, laughing, eating, complimenting my parents on how blessed they were to have such a strong, united family. But I knew the truth, and the truth was sitting in a folder I had slipped under my chair before I joined them at the table. Inside were the copies of everything I had collected: bank statements, loan documents, credit reports, recordings. My entire nightmare summarized in black and white, ready to be revealed. As the food was passed around and glasses clinked, the air felt heavy to me. On the surface, everything looked normal. Laughter bounced across the table, stories were shared, my cousins teased each other. But beneath it, there was tension. I could see it in the way my mother avoided my eyes, in the way Kendra kept stealing glances at me, like she was waiting for me to slip up, in the way my father's jaw tightened whenever I spoke. They thought I was back in line, that I had finally accepted my role as the quiet, obedient daughter who carried the weight of the family in silence. I let them believe it. I smiled when I needed to, nodded at the right moments, even laughed once or twice so it looked natural. But every movement I made was calculated. My heart was pounding, but my face gave nothing away. Underneath the table, my hand rested on that folder, my thumb tracing the edge of the paper as if to remind myself it was real. As dessert was brought out and the chatter grew louder, I took a slow breath. This was the stage I had set, and they had walked right into it. They thought this dinner was about forgiveness, about unity. But for me, it was about truth. I looked around at the faces of my family, all of them basking in the illusion of perfection, and I felt something shift inside me. They had no idea what was coming. And I was ready. The clink of silverware against plates faded as Amina slowly placed her fork down. The table was lined with roasted chicken, mashed potatoes, and her mother's favorite cornbread, but no one was really eating. Smiles stretched too wide, laughter felt too hollow, and beneath it all, the tension coiled tighter than a spring. Amina's heart pounded against her ribs, but her face was calm, unreadable. She glanced at the folder tucked beneath her chair. Tonight wasn't just another family dinner. It was the end of their lies. Patrice, her mother, raised her wine glass, smirking across the table. "It's good to see you finally coming around, Amina. Family is everything, after all." Amina leaned back in her chair, her voice steady though her hands trembled under the table. "Funny you say that, Mama, because I've been thinking a lot about family." Kendra, her sister, let out a sharp laugh. "Here we go. Another dramatic speech? Just eat, Amina. For once, don't ruin the mood." Her father, Leonard, grunted, stabbing a piece of meat with his fork. "Enough games, girl. Spit it out or shut it." The room went quiet. Cousins exchanged uneasy glances, an uncle coughed awkwardly, and Amina felt every eye on her. Her chest tightened, but she drew in a deep breath and finally said the words she had rehearsed 100 times in her head. "I know what you all did. And I'm done." The silence that followed was deafening. Patrice's smirk faltered, her glass trembling ever so slightly before she set it down. Leonard's jaw clenched, his knuckles whitening around the fork. Kendra tried to laugh, but it came out brittle. You know what? That we love you? That we've given you everything. Kendra sneered, her voice pitched too high. Amina didn't flinch. Slowly, deliberately, she reached under her chair and lifted the folder. Gasps rippled down the table. She set it on the linen cloth, the sharp slap of cardboard against wood cutting through the thick air. Her father barked. What's that supposed to be? Proof, Amina said simply. She opened the folder and pulled out the first document. Bank records, showing every transfer you made in my name, draining my savings. She slid the paper across the table. An aunt leaned forward to read, her eyes widening. Next came the second sheet. Signed documents where you forged my signature to take out loans. Leonard, your handwriting isn't as smooth as you think. Murmurs swelled louder, heads turning sharply toward her father. Finally, she laid down the recordings, printed transcripts with timestamps. And here, you admitting to it all. Laughing about how I'd never figure it out. The relatives erupted. Some recoiled in disgust. Others began whispering accusations. Patrice's face drained of color, while Leonard slammed his fist against the table so hard the dishes rattled. You ungrateful child, he roared. But Amina sat back, unshaken, her voice like ice. No, I'm done being your victim. And for the first time, the power shifted. The dining room had descended into chaos. Voices clashed against one another, shouts, denials, frantic justifications. Plates clattered as Leonard slammed his hand against the table, demanding everyone shut up. Patrice's voice rose in shrill protest, insisting that Amina had fabricated everything. Kendra laughed too loudly, too desperately, accusing Amina of being jealous, bitter, a liar. But Amina didn't join the storm. She sat in silence, watching the people she had once called her family unravel before her eyes. Their masks were cracking, their confidence bleeding out with every murmur of doubt from the relatives now turning against them. Look at the papers, one cousin shouted, holding up the bank records. This isn't fake. I can't believe this, whispered an aunt, her face pale. How could you do this to your own daughter? Patrice tried to shout over them, but her voice trembled. She's twisting things. You don't understand. Amina pushed her chair back, the sound scraping loudly against the hardwood floor. The room froze for a second, all eyes snapping to her. She rose to her feet with a calm that was sharper than any scream could ever be. You used me, she said softly, her voice cutting through the din like a blade. But you'll never get another chance. The room seemed to hold its breath. Leonard opened his mouth to bark another order, but the words died in his throat when she turned her back on him. Patrice reached out a hand, as if to grab her, but Amina stepped out of reach. She left the folder of documents spread across the table, the ink and signatures glaring under the warm glow of the chandelier. They were more than just papers. They were chains broken, lies exposed, a truth that could no longer be buried. As Amina walked toward the door, she heard the relatives' voices rising again, but this time they weren't aimed at her. They were accusing, demanding, turning on the people who had built their power on her silence. How could you betray your own child like this? You've shamed this entire family. Kendra tried to talk over them, her voice cracking. She's lying. She planned this. But no one was listening to her anymore. The tide had shifted. Amina placed her hand on the door handle. She paused for only a heartbeat, feeling the weight of it all pressed down on her chest. The grief of losing her family, the ache of betrayal, the heaviness of years stolen from her. But beneath it, something else had taken root, freedom. She opened the door and stepped out into the night. The cool air hit her skin, clearing her lungs of the suffocating smoke of their lies. Behind her, voices still raged, but she didn't look back. For the first time in her life, Amina felt both broken and whole. Grief and liberation mingled in her chest, and with every step away from that house, she knew she had chosen herself, and she would never be theirs again. Weeks passed, but the echoes of that dinner still lingered in the Caldwell family's world like a stain that wouldn't wash out. Word spread quickly. Atlanta wasn't a big city when it came to gossip, and church was the worst place to try to hide a scandal. Patrice, once admired for her grace and perfect family image, now couldn't step through the sanctuary doors without whispers following her. Women she used to gossip with turned their backs. Men who once praised her for raising such a strong family now avoided her eyes. Her reputation was in tatters, shredded by the very truth she thought she could bury. Leonard's fall came harder. Those bank records Amina left on the table didn't just shock relatives. They found their way into the wrong hands. An uncle who worked in finance quietly passed the evidence to the right authorities. Investigators showed up at Leonard's office, questions piled higher than he could dodge, and suddenly the man who loved to brag about control had none. He was forced to answer for debts he had hidden under Amina's name, and whispers of fraud wrapped around his career like a noose. Kendra, the golden child who always sneered at Amina, tasted humiliation for the first time. Her co-workers whispered behind her back when they learned how her perfect family crumbled. The man she had been dating broke up with her, not wanting to be tied to that mess. For someone who lived on image and validation, the shame was unbearable. She tried to pin the blame on Amina, painting her as bitter and manipulative, but nobody bought it. Deshaun, reckless as ever, was cut off. With his parents drowning in their own chaos, there was no one left to clean up his mistakes. He spiraled quickly, losing money and friends, realizing too late that the safety net he had always counted on had vanished. And Amina? She wasn't unscathed. The scars of betrayal clung to her. Her credit was still ruined, and the debts still lingered like ghosts of what they had stolen. Nights came where she cried alone, wondering why her own blood had chosen greed over love. But even in the struggle, she felt a new kind of strength. No more lies. No more walking on eggshells. No more pretending she was part of a family that had never truly loved her. She picked up extra shifts at the hospital, slowly rebuilding. She moved into a small but quiet apartment, her own space untouched by their poison. She didn't forgive them, and she didn't want to. Forgiveness, she realized, was not required for freedom. One evening, standing by her window as the city lights flickered below, she whispered to herself, "Sometimes revenge isn't burning their house down. It's walking away and watching it collapse without you." And as she closed the curtains and turned toward her own life, Amina knew their ruin was her peace. She was free. Do you believe Amina made the right choice by cutting ties and letting her family's lies destroy themselves? Or should she have stayed and tried to mend what was broken? Share your thoughts in the comments. I'd really like to hear them. And if stories like this speak to you, make sure to hit that subscribe button, drop a like, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss the next one.